Real questions, real answers for real life. Come on in and pull up a chair. You're at 1850 Main Street with Michael DelGiorno and David Zanotti.
What is a self-executing constitutional amendment? And is it as bad as it sounds?
It's funny. When you say self-executing, I picture a firing squad. The guy has all the guns in his hand pointed at himself. That's like a self-executing.
Precisely my point. What is a self-executing constitutional amendment? It means it's sitting there waiting for someone to use it. It's on the shelf waiting to be used. So how now, we might ask, will the Soros Podesta Holder Obama coalition use this proviso to keep Donald Trump from running for office again? They've already started.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago, a tax lawyer in Palm Beach County in Florida went to a federal court and said Donald Trump can't stand on the ballot. His name must be taken off the ballot. That would be the primary and the general election in Florida. He's suing in federal court because he's guilty of breaking the 14th Amendment, Article 3, in participating in or supporting those who participated in an act of insurrection or rebellion against the Constitution. Now, I don't know if a single judge or single lawyer coming forward as a citizen of the state of Florida has the ability to gain standing in a federal court on that. But that's just one example of why this strategy was launched. He might get standing. At the same time, the threat network is going out around the country, basically saying, and you see it in the articles we've been talking about, that this is one of those deals where if someone goes to the Secretary of State in their town, or in their state and says, Mr. Secretary, you can't let Donald Trump's name be on the ballot because he's violated the 14th Amendment. Do you know the Secretary of State has discretion whether he wants to act on that or not? There's nothing in the Constitution that bars him from unilaterally doing it.
And that would, by the LA Times definition, be them doing exactly what they're accusing Donald Trump of having done. I mean, remember that frosting in the cake? I can't get away from it. All right, because part of what they're accusing of, you were trying to coerce state officials. Well, what is this?
Oops. Yeah.
Right.
Impact the outcome of an election. Yes. Suppress votes. Yes. We could go on and on. But now hang on. Now, before we jump off this is such a big deal because it plays. It's like, I'm going to put another cake. I'm going to give you 4 or 5 layers on this cake. Okay. Look, an individual citizen's gone now to the federal courts. Now they're saying they go to the secretaries of state. Well, if they've got a pro-Trump or a Republican secretary of state, maybe you go through your House of Representatives that might be controlled by the Democrats, or your Senate that's controlled by the Democrats, and you get a resolution saying Donald Trump can't appear on the ballot. You go to your governor who declares by edict Donald Trump can't be on the ballot. There are so many people with positions of authority that can self-execute this thing, pull it off the shelf, try it on and see if it fits and do it themselves. You could have a petition movement to remove Donald Trump from the ballot. And if it is a deep blue state, what do you think the odds? You think Governor Pritzker isn't going to go, yeah, this is a great idea in Illinois. Trump's out of here. New York? You don't think Michigan? California? Maryland? I mean, they're going to be bouncing Trump off this thing and then requiring that his team has to go to federal court in every one of these states. Now, they'll batch all the decisions, and it'll quickly go to the Supreme Court. But we are going to have a massive Supreme Court decision on whether or not what Trump did and what happened on January 6th is the equivalent of the reason the 14th Amendment, Article 3 was passed, which was a civil war where 650,000 people died. And there are lawyers in these articles that are, honestly, in the 126-page paper, the 2 lawyers that are now kind of like carrying the intellectual weight on this, they said, well, now get this.
The second part's going to be a little tougher than the first.
Here's their logic. This is what they said. They said more people died on January 6th than died at Fort Sumter, the battle that launched the Civil War, because nobody died at Fort Sumter.
Right. Yeah.
It was a symbolic
event.
By
the way, I have to do this just as a point of truth and record. There is no autopsy and/or criminal conclusion that the officer who died from what happened to him that day on January 6th. So
the Capitol Police officer, right? Yeah, you're exactly right.
So it's technically a tie, 0. All right, Can I start with one question? That's
true. But the one person who did die was a United States Air Force veteran
Who got
a female
shot.
who was
Oh,
there,
that's true.
unarmed, who was shot by a Capitol policeman who has never been convicted of that crime.
I forgot. The only death
And
was
it
a
happened in
was a
broad daylight.
protester. You're right.
We watched her die on film.
When we had the discussion about what was the stand down calling on election night, in other words, whatever the play was, we never got to see it. The show didn't open. They were told to stand down. We'll never know. Is it possible that these articles that we're talking about were for if Donald Trump won and how they were going to remove him if he won? But that play never came to be. And then it was altered to after he lost to ensure you leave, which is what the impeachment was about. Or if you ever dare to run again, which
Don't
is
come back here again.
which is what I think we're surmising. And here it comes. It's self-executing, and they're going to pick it up and try to execute it. And of course, the horror would be if, Donald Trump's already busy in all these different trials they have him busy in. And then now he's got to go fight to be on a ballot. And are we going to have a presidential election, perhaps even if he won the primary, a general election where the president is even on ballots in blue states? Because what's troubling for me there is not just this notion that whether it fails or succeeds, it's likely to actually create a real insurrection, but that we may now be, because we talked about the whole point of this show is 1850. In 1850, they had 10 years to solve these differences and avoid a civil war. In 2023, are we in a 10-year period? Because we can't dare have a civil war in this day and age. Now you've got states versus states, not a media division, not a social dilemma, not a cultural matrix. Now you got literally states versus states. Is somebody trying to brew a civil war? Because that's how stupid this is looking.
Well, Michael, it's frightening. In the article that was out in the Atlantic, where Tribe is the lead lawyer in this piece, and then he's joined with a former federal judge, they even have a clause in that article where they basically say, and they use the word pray, we pray that the implementation of this strategy doesn't create basically an insurrection. They acknowledge the fact that literally attempting to walk this out could be so disenfranchising and so frustrating that it could create violence. And they tip their hand and they say that in the article. And I'm thinking to myself, have these guys gone mad? Why are they planting that? Because it sounds the same way that they were planting things back in the shadow conspiracy articles and before that period of time. And now here they are again. So it's almost like it's a bait. There's just, if they can start this happening in enough states. And by the way, if they do this in New York and Illinois and California, it means nothing to the outcome of the presidency.
Right.
But if it trips Trump supporters into violence across the country, now what have they gained? They've totally disrupted the election. They're literally saying they're using this as bait to alter the outcome of the next election, and they're getting away with it. I mean, they're all lined up in a row. They stuck the strategy in the Atlantic cannon. They pulled the trigger. It blew up all over the place. And now all over the country, people are expecting 50 state challenges to Trump's right to be on the ballot on top of all the other indictments. So my question to you is, big play. Is this what Soros and Podesta and Holder want? Or is this a movement that got out of their control? What does this mean?
Well, but there's a deeper question, too, because what is the ultimate agenda of the Soroses and the Podestas? Is it an administrative state, perpetual administrative state that they're in control of?
Sure. The special interests, yeah.
Or if we were a fly on the wall, would it be just the destruction of this republic, period?
Yeah.
So even chaos is a victory for them. Lawlessness is a victory for them. A broken economy is a victory for them. As long as the republic doesn't stand, as long as we, the people, are removed from the driver's seat, that's victory. I've said it a million times. The DNA that I always look for is when there is a weapon being used that they win, whether they win or they win if they lose.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
seems to be their trademark. It's kind of like Kennedy and Daley Plaza. He's not leaving alive. All right. There was nothing left to chance. I think, for me, it comes back to the big question. Is this a constitutional crisis requiring preservation and justice, or is this political weaponry? I personally believe it's the latter, and it's riddled with double standards. So they can get on television and call, violence and burning and trying to kill police and innocent citizens and looting. They can call that good trouble. You can't gather at a rally on January 6th without that being an insurrection. And there is no definition in the Insurrection Act because it really didn't apply to this, and they're trying to make it apply to this. So it just creates a chaos. I think the bigger question is this about Donald Trump or anybody of opposing voice, anybody of non-compliance to the administrative state? I mean, at some point, you got to push all this away and go, are they this afraid of Donald Trump? That they go to such lengths that we discuss, whether it's the timepiece shadow campaign to save the democracy, because if Donald Trump won, democracy as we know it doesn't exist anymore. Who is this Donald Trump? That he is such a threat to them. And what is the specific threat? If Soros is overhearing us right now, which, by the way, he would not get service at 1850 Main Street Cafe. But
oh, sure he would. Come on, let's have a cup of coffee. I'd love to sit down and talk with George. I really would. Bring him in. I'll buy the coffee. I would love to buy a cup of coffee for George Soros.
But what are they worried about us figuring out? What are they so afraid of? Or is this going to, once Donald Trump is gone, apply to the next person that isn't establishment Republican playing along?
When you subscribe to 1850 Main Street, you're the first to find out what's happening next with new guests, publications, and events. And when you spread the word about 1850 Main Street, you're helping others find real answers to the real questions facing America right now. To learn more, visit 1850mainstreet.com. And please, tell a friend.
There's the question, is this about Trump or is it about anyone who basically dares to challenge the power of the administrative state? And let's ask a serious question about this. And it's kind of upside down, but it's a sober-minded question that you would flesh out in a course on law in the courts. If this rebellion and insurrection against the Constitution is what happens when you have a rally that goes bad, where you have people break the law on criminal trespassing, right? No one is executed. There are no weapons. There's nothing else happens. There's no play 2 or play 3. It wasn't one stage of a multiple. We're comparing this to the Civil War. It doesn't matter. So since it doesn't matter, now we have to have a new threshold of understanding with undefined terms. So let me ask you, is working right now to amend the Constitution? As we did in the term limits movement in 1992, we put forward 3 ballot initiatives at the state level for state officers, for state representatives and senators, and for members of Congress. Was us attempting to amend the Constitution on term limits to change the terms, was that a means of insurrection and rebellion because we were actively engaged at changing the Constitution? Well, no, the amendment process is in the Constitution, so you can't be accused of overturning the Constitution. Okay. All right. So amending it is still okay. What if you're simply rallying against things that you disagree with, like people who continually and perpetually rally against the Second Amendment? Are they involved in insurrection? Where does it stop? Where does rebellion and insurrection stop? How do you define it? Now, it's not defined in the statute, so now we're going to ask the courts to tell us what it means. You think the Supreme Court wants that argument?
In defense of Donald Trump, and long forgotten in all of these articles that we discussed, or even in our conversation, is what did happen. And again, you and I were very responsible with COVID, from masks to vaccines. I mean, I get it. But I think everybody realizes, reasonable people realize, they used fear and they controlled people using that fear. They were perpetuating that fear every day. The death toll's going across on the crawler. They wanted everybody to think, you get COVID, you die. The only one who can protect you is government. Stay home. Never mind we're destroying your job. Never mind we're destroying everything that you've amassed in life and your livelihood. We know more than you. You die unless you obey us. Well, in that process that a lot of people didn't like was the changing of election laws. And not going through state legislatures.
That's
so,
a big
David,
point. That's a big point. Because
big
only
point.
state
So was
legislatures
that
have
an
the right.
insurrection?
Yeah.
A COVID insurrection?
Wait a minute. Whoa. Let me make sure I understand what you said. Since the state legislatures did not change the laws, that's a direct violation of the Constitution.
What about every
since
governor?
governors and other elected officials changed the rules of federal elections outside of constitutional provision, was that an insurrection? Was that rebellion against the Constitution? How could it not have been rebellion against the Constitution? It's direct defiance of the law.
Yeah.
They held elections in direct defiance of the law.
That's all lost in this conversation. In other words,
that's a great point.
Because
that's
every
a great point. I didn't thought about that.
Every time we do these conversations, what are we really doing here? These are like little snippets, moments. I think you nailed it in that they're like weapons that sit there in case we need them to pick them up. I go back to The Godfather. These are like little guns hidden behind the toilet in case Michael has the guts to do it. All right.
Now, I got to get back to my other question, though. Tell me the election play. How do you see this playing on the ultimate? Is this a desirable thing? Is it just a distraction? Is it a false flag? What does it do for the Democrats to win?
Well, what they're hoping is, along with all of the allegations and all of the cases Donald Trump is being forced to fight, distract him and his ability to campaign and win, to be used against him by primary candidates, or to get everybody out there to go, Donald Trump's got too much baggage. We got to move away from him. There's too much on the line, and they're going to stack the deck against us. So let's go with this. So it's to get rid of Donald Trump.
But I thought they wanted Trump to be the candidate. I thought that they wanted Biden versus Trump.
I think they do. What I have said all along as a point of record, and I'll just defend myself and bring it up again. Oh, they want Donald Trump, but they want a wounded Donald Trump.
Okay, so this is just
not a strong, focused Trump 2.0 with all the party united behind him. They want the party divided and him wounded to ensure. I don't buy in the Joe Biden. I'm struggling to buy in that Joe Biden is going to be the candidate when this is all said and done. So they want a wounded Donald Trump, probably against a Gavin Newsom.
Does this mean that the strategy that they've got with the 4 sets of indictments, they're not confident enough that they're going to work or work in a timely enough fashion, so they got to launch this as well?
David, if I were to use one finger and poke your chest as hard as I can, that's it. That's all I got. If I use 2, I got a little more, but that's all I got. I use 3, I got a little more. I use all 5 and close my fist. Now I'm punching you out. Again, these are all, they've got many uses and weapons up their sleeve to ensure the outcome they need. And you never know until they tell them to stand down. I think it's just all about it's why I conclude that it's just another one of the things up their sleeve that they got to ensure the administrative state survives. Not the democracy, certainly not the republic or the flag.
So they must be absolutely convinced that Trump can survive all of this and still appear on the ballot. Because that's ultimately what they want. They want Trump. They just want him beat the smithereens.
Well, you know as well as I do, if this ever did get to the Supreme Court, no one's going to call what happened January 6th insurrection.
Wouldn't it be fascinating if it did get to the court? Maybe what if the Trump people were to accelerate this process? What if they were to grab onto it wholeheartedly and instantly roll out every single resource they have to take this thing on as fast as they can and force it to the court before it can get any farther in bloom?
Let me ask you this. Do you think you and me and everybody in talk radio or everybody watching Fox TV are the only ones that haven't connected the dots that every time you attack Donald Trump, I got a letter from I don't think Donald Trump wrote the letter, but from Donald Trump's campaign bragging how since that awful day in Fulton County and that mugshot, he's raised a record $9 million. Remember Donald Trump who didn't need anybody's money? Now I've raised $9 million.
How did we resist not doing a whole conversation here about the mugshot?
That picture, are you kidding me? If a picture paints 1,000 words.
Oh, no, he's singing.
So, but
get us thrown out of this place. Don't sing.
No, but here's the deal I want to make clear. Podesta and Soros and the far left and the media and the corporate moguls and all the technocrats at the cabal table, they know every time you attack Donald Trump, he gets a bump. Again, they want him, but they want him wounded and they want his party divided to ensure their weak candidate, who's made a disaster of the country for 4 years, can survive, or whoever they got trotting out of the bullpen.
Well,
it's the same DNA. It's the same play. That's why I know it's them. I'm just wondering why everybody else can't figure it out.
well, and that's really a concern, because it's not that you and I are so much smarter than everybody else, even though we've got a lot of years of experience in this field, in this arena, in the courtrooms, et cetera. We get all that. And we should be telling people what we've discovered and what questions we're asking, because it's only fair. I guess their assumption is that the American people are too stupid to be able to read into all of this and to make the simple ask of the question. Is what happened on January 6th the same thing as the 5 years of the United States Civil War?
No.
And most people are going to say, I really don't think so. Because, if you think about an oath of office to the Constitution and the idea of disrupting or rebelling or insurrection against the Constitution, man, they didn't even define the words. So isn't this just one more political trick to use the vestiges of our government against the people?
Or to incite somebody. That January 6th was as much about taking the bait as anything. That's why I got so angry at Donald Trump on January 6th, and I loved my president, and I voted for my president.
Yeah, I remember that.
But because he was dumb enough to take the bait. And we're lucky worse didn't happen on January 6th based on the recklessness of his words on that day. But yeah, no.
Well, speaking of which, let's ask this question out loud before God and all these witnesses. All right, and let's get our lawyers' numbers handy and nearby. There were lots of people in the media that were covering that event live. People that were on the ground, people that were in the air, people that promoted folks to go to Washington, D.C., sent buses to Washington, D.C. Are those people all guilty of aiding and abetting in an insurrection and rebellion against the Constitution?
What did we used to talk about when I was on the radio? Why has nobody ever investigated? This threat on the Capitol building went to Nancy Pelosi weeks before it happened. It was the Sergeant at Arms' responsibility, and the Sergeant at Arms reports to the Speaker of the House, and she did nothing. Was that not, by definition, aiding and abetting an insurrection? If after the fact you're going to call it an insurrection, why did she tell?
I had some people in law enforcement and people who were eyewitnesses who said to me, who ordered the Capitol Police to remove the barriers from the Capitol so that the crowds could go in? Who issued that order?
For me, who was live on the air, for all these people you talk about covering it, we were all wondering. I mean, remember when they were just walking through Statuary Hall like they were on a tour? It was.
I'm telling you, I've seldom ever seen you that hot on the air. You were really upset
because I knew they were being played.
They're all being
played. Why
played.
did I know it and Donald Trump didn't?
Yeah.
He should have had me as his advisor, because I would have told him what he was walking into. I want to come back to this. This is very classic Podesta and Soros. I said the most significant thing that happened in 2016 was not Donald Trump, as significant as that was, being elected. I will go to my grave. So far, my life's still in progress. Donald Trump and Jack Kennedy are the only two presidents that were never scripted and supposed to be. Mm-hmm. They were very disruptive. I believe it was almost godlike in the way it kicked the can of the direction of the nation. We'll never know what would have happened if we got a second term of Jimmy Carter and no Ronald Reagan. We'll never know what would have happened had Hillary won and handed our republic to Barack Obama on an international stage. We'll never know. But I still say that wasn't the most significant thing that happened in 2016. The death of journalism was. And I warned everybody that in the death of journalism, it's not a victory for the right and it's not a victory for the left. It's a defeat for this republic. I think that's mixed in to a lot of this and how it plays. They continue to set false narratives. They continue to silence any opposing voices. I'm sorry, folks. While we're having a discussion on insurrection, I think that's very much a rebellion and an insurrection in and of itself.
So let's go back to sitting down together and saying, what are we going to title these conversations that we have together? And we said 1850, and we put out the model and said, why? Because it's so clear that our country is in the position of the disillusion that was coming in 1850. how many times in the very brief amount of time we've been on the air have we gone back to that period? And here we are again. We're talking about an amendment to the Constitution, a provision of an amendment that came right out of the Civil War, and somebody just picked it off the shelf and said, let's do it all over again, but let's reconstruct it in this hour for our political gain. I mean, it's like Fort Sumter all over again.
Well, they must not have much respect for Governor DeSantis. That's for sure, because that should be their worry, that if we move on beyond Trump, we'll go to the governor, and he would be the same kind of president as Donald Trump. So if what Trump would do as president, and let's face it, he'd only get one more term, so part of him would be a lame duck. Donald Trump wouldn't be your typical lame duck, though. He would use that as the first of 12 years of making lasting change. But they must.
You mean you're going to violate the Constitution and not stand down for term limits? Are you predicting another insurrection?
No. What I'm saying is
he'd run for 3 terms.
No, Donald Trump would run for 4 years, be very aggressive, returning all of his policies, and the Republican, whoever it was, waiting in the wings, maybe his vice president, maybe DeSantis or someone else, would then get the next 8 years. But I'm convinced they want a wounded Trump representing a divided party, because that's what it would take for Joe Biden to win, or whoever they trot in from the bullpen. But if their plan worked and Donald Trump was too busy defending himself in numerous court cases that he couldn't run an effective campaign, and they got somebody other than him, why aren't they afraid the party could unite behind that person and defeat them? At some point in the conversation, it's relevant. Somebody must not think much of anybody other than Donald Trump in this batch of Republicans in a primary so far, because that's the flaw of their plan, unless they think much of it.
I'll take it one step farther. They're guessing that everyone is okay being bullied again. Got all bullied through COVID. Now we're all going to get bullied again, and they're going to call the shots, and they'll use whatever device they need to use to get their way. And anybody who stands in the way, maybe you'll be guilty of insurrection next.
They may even have another virus up their sleeve if they need it.
The conversations are just getting started. To get connected, check out 1850mainstreet.com. We don't data mine anyone or sell your information. Subscribe today so you don't miss a single conversation. We'll see you next time here at 1850 Main Street.